British debate this out. I'm asking, are you buying an electric car? Well, joining me to discuss is Ben Habib, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Lois Perry from Car 26, Peter Edwards, former editor of The Labour List, and John Grant, Sustainable Construction and Climate Change. I'll start with you, John. Why not? John, are you buying an electric car?
No, because I'm trying to work out a life without a car, even though it's super hard. So I do own a car at the moment. But my plan is to try and work out a strategy to live without a car. But whilst we are constantly cutting public transport and just destroying our railways, it's going to be really tough.
Well, I'm glad you said that. So what do you think to this government drive to try and boost manufacturers, get them to get more people, produce more cars so more people will buy the electric cars?
Well, it's the constant plan of expand. And rather than change, what we're doing is we're trying to shift this ridiculous idea that every individual should own a metal box and be able to travel from A to B whenever they want. There just isn't enough stuff to provide that. And it produces pollution. Even electric cars do that. I mean, they are a lot less damaging than petrol cars. So you know, those people that do need a vehicle, there are many of them out there, they're vulnerable and such like. You know, using electrics is better for that, but they still produce all those tiny particles and such like in their brakes and tyres. This is not a solution. This is what you do whilst you move to the solution, which is a world that people use active travel and public transport, and we move away from individual ownership of cars, which of course economically is going to take a massive shift in our attitude.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Lois Perry.
Well, it's very interesting that now we have the woke and net zero fanatics finally admitting what I've been saying for all this time, which is that they don't want us in electric cars, they want us out of our cars and on public transport. I won't be buying an electric car, and I think that quotas, I mean, does that sound like Soviet Russia? Does that sound communist to you? Rishi Sunak pushed the ban back to 2030 from 2035, but only with this compromise position, which basically forces car manufacturers to make the, you know, people don't want to buy the electric cars, so it's inflationary. It just pushes the price of all cars up. But John's admitted it. They want us out of our cars, off the roads, in our homes, staring at the screens, on universal basic income, not having a life under communism. Thanks, John. I literally have been waiting for you guys to admit this for 2 years.
I'm going to give him a right to reply because he's shaking his head. John, you're shaking your head. You did say it. I swear you said it. Didn't you say that?
Yeah.
No, I said that, but to be insulted in that way was it's a little rich there. That what I'm looking for is a better world, a better way of doing things. The way it's being portrayed here is like I'm taking away people's freedom.
Well, you are.
Rather than the thousands of people that are being their lives shortened by using cars. This is just.
But what about, John, can I just ask you, what about these poor people who are mining the lithium and cobalt and things? Their lives, you're going to need that for the electric cars, so their lives will be short.
There's no such thing as a free lunch. It's just that burning oil and gas is massively worse than producing electric cars. But what's better than electric cars is getting people to give up that individual idea where everyone owns one or two per household, and that kind of madness. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, it's all very well if you're able-bodied, but for those of us, if you're able-bodied, that's fine, but there are plenty of people who can't do that. I want to go to Ben Habib.
OK, well, I'm really glad we're having this discussion because Rishi Sunak thought he was appealing to the right wing of the Tory party when he moved that deadline from 2030 to 2035. But what he didn't tell you was the policy we're discussing today, which requires that manufacturers increase the ratio of the cars they sell from 22% electric vehicles next year to 80% by 2030. And the way that that is inflationary is by the penalisation of those manufacturers who fail to hit those targets. So if they go on selling fossil fuel cars, they pay bigger and bigger penalties. And of course, when they pay those penalties are passed on to the consumer through higher cost of internal combustion engine cars and indeed electric vehicle cars. Those costs are shared across the population. And so when Rishi Sunak says we can have a better, more more prosperous economic future by the inexorable march to net zero, he's actually telling porkies, because this is forcing inflation into the system. And the same policy applies to gas boilers. Manufacturers of gas boilers have to increasingly sell heat exchange pumps, and if they fail to do it, they get penalised, and again, those penalties are passed on to the consumer. The inexorable march to net zero is massively inflationary, massively economically damaging, and whether electric cars are marginally better for you than fossil internal combustion engine cars, or whether we should all be on trains, that's a separate debate. But before we get there, what we need to recognise is the massive cost of going to net zero.
Peter Edwards.
Would I buy an electric car? Well, I think most of us are going to have to eventually. Currently, we don't really have the charging points to make it work. I thought John made the other good point that's really relates to all of this, which is public transport. Because, of course, the answer is to drive less. But, you know, John's right. For example, my first job was in Cumbria, and public transport there was really poor, and I didn't have a car at the time, and it was much, much tougher. So we know we're going to run out of fossil fuels, and eventually the internal combustion engine is going to be phased out. But I don't think it's appropriate to say people are woke and communists for being realistic about challenges about the future. So I think, Lois, you did undermine your argument a bit by taking that approach.
No, well, I don't think so too. There's no risk of us running out of fossil fuels for hundreds of years. That's complete and utter nonsense. What he's talking about is taking away individualism. If that is not communist or neo-Marxist, I don't know what is. The lack of the individual over the collective is what communism is about, and that's exactly what he's talking about. That's what net zero is about.
John.
I mean, this idea of conflating the ownership of a car with freedom is just ridiculous.
But it is.
But John, free without a car. The ownership of a car is not about freedom.
I'm a woman. It's different if you're a woman.
If they didn't kill people, that would be hysterical. You could do stand-up on that ridiculousness.
No,
really?
That's not fair. That's not fair. I think
Lois has got a very valid point, and it doesn't just apply to the inexorable march to net zero. It's the inexorable march in our government policy. We are stripping away aspiration and replacing it with dependency. We're stripping away wealth creation and replacing it with wealth redistribution. The state is getting bigger and bigger and more intrusive. We are practicing progressive socialism to a greater and greater extent, and ultimately that ends up with the individual being trounced, and that's the point Lois is making.
Well, it does feel like, listen, they're being forced to a quota, so they have to make these cars, even if we don't want them, and then in the end we're going to have to buy them because that'll be all there is, which doesn't seem acceptable. So finally, I'm going to come to you, Peter Edwards. Would you buy an electric car, yes or no?
Yeah, I'd buy an electric car if the prices come down. We need more charging points, and also we've got to learn to debate with each other in a civil way and not to reduce people's motives just because they differ from us.
OK, Ben Habib?
I would never buy an electric car unless I'm absolutely forced to.
Lois Perry?
I'd rather cut my arm off, flambe it and eat it.
That would be interesting. And also John Grant.
Well, I might think about an electric vehicle of some kind, but maybe not a car. Maybe some other lightweight vehicle that would actually be a lot more efficient. And then
bicycle.
Long journey.
Has he got a petrol car? He's got a petrol car now, though, I think.
What kind of car have you got now, petrol or diesel?
It's a petrol car.
This is what we all have, because the bottom line is no one can afford an electric car.
Absolutely right.
I can't afford one. Most people can't afford one. Thank you so much, Ben Habib, Deputy Leader of Reform, Lois Perry, Car 26 Director, Peter Edwards, former editor of The Labellist, and John Grant, Sustainable Construction and Climate Change. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for your thoughts. What do you think at home? Would you buy an electric car? Can't wait to see what the poll says. But